So, yesterday we were talking about free will, and we were talking about how it's necessary for the human being to receive and achieve the goodness that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to give him. The goodness being aspects of, or similar to, divinity itself, because God is the greatest good. And there's a focus on the aspect of being self-determined to some extent, as a creature is, by having free will. Because the Creator is totally, absolutely, and necessarily self-determined. Human being can be relatively and contingently and partially self-determined, but that at least creates a similarity which is not possessed really by any other creature. And that sets up a very special relationship. And then, using free will, the human being can acquire for himself characteristics which are like divine characteristics, like loving kindness, like justice, like faithfulness, and continuity, and loyalty. And in those ways becomes to resemble the Kodesh Baruch Hu even more, and thereby possess even more of the good. That was the first project that Lutzato said in the second chapter of The Way of God is the purpose of free will. It's not to enable. It is the way in which God gives his good to the creature that he's creating, since God's purpose in the whole creation is to give good and to do good. And then we said that the purpose of of free will is also to enable dveikus, which means connection. We pointed out that it's not like putting a nail on a wall or gluing a picture to the wall, because those are physical objects. Connection, in this case, is going to be relationship, and that's the purpose of the creation of man, to develop the kind of spirituality which qualifies him for a relationship. And then we said there are different kinds of relationships, different levels, and the relationship that we're seeking is one of greatest mutual integration. And the greatest mutual integration occurs when there's a kind of parity between the two parties. Because if one is categorically superior to the other, then that makes the relationship lopsided. You can't have that kind of relationship with your children. And so, infamous problem now of men playing basketball with women, which is grotesque. That's not real sport. And here, Akash Baruch Hu wants a kind of sharing between himself and the creation. That sharing creates a kind of relationship on a par. We said yesterday that the relationship of face-to-face, which in Kabbalistic terms is the ideal type of relationship. So a human being acquires that kind of relationship by being spiritually self-creative, so that then he becomes something which is self-determined, just as Kodesh Baruch Hu was absolutely and totally self-determined. He's partially self-determined, and has all the qualities that self-determined activity creates for him, which makes him relate to the Creator. And through those, there's a kind of bonding. That's as far as we got yesterday. Now, the final step is to understand that the emotion in that relationship is love. And the love comes from both sides. Kodesh Baruch Hu shows his love for us, and we, responding to his love, develop love for him. There's a midrash which I quote often, but I didn't focus on this aspect of it. In the Song of Songs, now the Song of Songs, really the subject of it is the relationship between God and the Jewish people. The king in the Song of Songs is God, and the paramour is the Jewish people. And there's a whole sketch of Jewish history and the dynamics of Jewish history there. And in the Song of Songs, there's a verse where the king identifies his beloved as Tamasi, which in Hebrew means my pure one. And Midrash says, don't read it Tamasi, but Ta'omasi, which means my twin. Now, knowing the actual subject of the poem, it's a breathtaking, shocking idea. The creator of the universe is calling a creature his twin. Usually think of twins as very, very similar to one another. You know, good, identical twins. Even the parents often can't tell them apart. Here, the creator, the creature. And if you had any doubts about it, the Midrash goes on and says, I'm not bigger than she is, and she's not bigger than I am. Which is inconceivable. How could a creature be as big as the creator? I mean, that's just out of question. So you have to learn how to read the way in which the rabbis expressed themselves, and the Tanakh expressed itself. When it makes a statement is often in a certain dimension, in a certain respect, in a certain quality. It's not a universal statement. Ramchal quotes this statement in the Das Tunos, and he says that both of us are responsible for perfecting the creation. Kadosh Baruch Hu made it, and made it with potential, and then it's the activity of the Jewish people together with the Kadosh Baruch Hu that realizes that potential and brings it to its fruition. Now, how does the love express itself? So, I'm now going to tell you an idea of mine. I didn't see this explicitly, but from what I know, this is the gist that I get. There are really two mitzvos: to have fear and awe for God, and to love God. And some people have written that there seems to be a kind of conflict here. Fear certainly motivates a person to take distance. If you're afraid of something, you don't want to be close to it because you're in danger. So you try to pull yourself away. Awe may not lead you to step away, though the Rambam does write it that way, but awe is a consciousness of the enormous gap between you and the thing for which you have awe. Of course, it's become degraded by overuse when people say that's awesome. But one thing that awesome means is I can't do it easily. Because if I could do it easily, I wouldn't call it awesome. It's something which is very, very difficult to achieve and very valuable to achieve. So that means I feel the distance between me and that thing that's awesome. So yira in Hebrew, which is fear and awe, is a word that connotes distance from. Ahava, love, connotes connection, longing to be together, longing to be associated, identification. So, experientially, emotionally, love on the one hand and fear and awe on the other hand feel like they're in opposites. They're in tension with one another. One is pulling you close, and the other is driving you away, or is a consciousness of being away. But they're both mitzvos. And because Baruch Hu commanded us to perform both of these mitzvos, there must be some way, I believe, in which they can be performed simultaneously. Can't be that you alternate back and forth between doing one and not the other, but you never get to do both. That wouldn't be a reasonable way to explain how Kadosh Baruch Hu set up the system. And some people, I think, are misled by what the Rambam writes in the Laws of Fundamentals of Torah, chapter 2, Law 2, where he says, what is the way to achieve both love and fear and awe? Study HaKadosh Baruch Hu's works, and you'll come to love him. And when you understand the wisdom and greatness of his works, you'll feel how small you are, and you'll be thrust backwards. The Rambam describes there this contradiction that I was talking about, where love draws you close, and fear and awe drives you back. And it sounds like, I even saw someone write this, I mean, you see, it's like a pendulum. You can't be in one place where you have both. So you swing from one to the other. I think this is a mistake, because what the Rambam writes there is, what is the way to achieve love and awe? How do you get to it? And it could be that in the process of achieving them, there is an oscillation. Sometimes you work on the one, and sometimes you work on the other, and the types of effort you have to make are different types of effort, and maybe the effort of achieving it is something which you can't do both of them simultaneously. That could be. But I don't believe it can be that forever you're in this oscillating process, and there's no such thing as fulfilling both mitzvahs simultaneously. That, to me, would be an impossibility for a way in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu sets up a plan of mitzvahs. But I have a way of explaining how they could be realized simultaneously. Let me give you a very homely parable. You receive in the I guess nowadays we say, you get an email, and the email is an invitation to a birthday party. Let's imagine different sources, different people who are issuing the invitation, and how you would respond. Let's suppose it's a neighbor from down the street. Gee, that's nice. You thought of me. Will I go? Well, I'll check my schedule. If I don't have anything doing, if I have time on my hands, I might go. It's the manager of your housing complex. Well, and especially, let's say he's a good person, he does a good job, and you have friendly relations with him. Well, certainly you'd make a bigger effort, and you'd feel more pleased by the invitation. Well, I suppose it's the mayor of your city, and he's a good mayor, caring and responsible and constructive and creative, like the present mayor of the city of Jerusalem. In the last election, though he ran against it, because he had like 80% of the vote. People are very, very happy with Mayor Leon. So if the mayor of the city issued an invitation, that would be a must. You certainly wouldn't. And you feel very pleased that he thought of you and he wanted you to join him. Okay, now let's jump up to the king of the country. Today, when you have presidents that you elect and 4 years later throw away, they don't get the same. But let's suppose you have a king. He's been king for 20 years, and he's really beloved and cares and does things that are good for the country. He's a good person, a good example. You got an invitation from the king? That would be enormous. And you'd get much more pleasure out of it. You'd feel much more honored by it. The greater the gap between you and the inviter, the person who's issuing the invitation, the more honor you feel and the greater pleasure you have in the invitation. Now let's imagine that it's not an invitation to a birthday party, but it's an invitation to work together. The king, who's running the whole country, has a responsibility for millions of people on his shoulders, says, I want to invite you to work with me in this responsibility. You have certain talents, you have certain abilities, something to contribute. We can do better than I can do alone. Come and join me in this. So you think, the truth is I'm an independent businessman. I have a pin factory, and I make pins. But I could have an input into running the whole country? Surely you leave your pins behind in order to go to work with the king. And now, suppose the king says, not only have I seen your work record, but I've had people share with me their impressions of you, and I see that you're a nice person. You're a good person. I'm going to enjoy working with you. We'll share it together. Wouldn't that be thrilling? Wouldn't you feel privileged? The very fact that he's so much greater than you increases the thrill and the privilege in being invited into a partnership with the king. So it's the very distance between you that generates the closeness of the relationship. Whereas if the head of the apartment complex or your next door neighbor down, neighbor down the street invites you, you don't have that thrill and that sense of honor and sense of joy of doing something because he's just like you. So, I invite people to my birthday party and he invited me to his birthday party. So what? So I think that first step of realizing the greatness that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has in every respect, particularly in value, embodying perfection, and all the elements of perfection, that very distance, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, yes, I want you to, you and I to be partners, the first thought is, really? Really? We should be? He says, yes, that's what I want. You are the kind of creature that can be partners with the Creator in perfecting the whole of the creation. And then it becomes a very intimate relationship. Kadosh Baruch Hu is there. He's concerned about you. He's guiding your life in every moment, in every respect. You can interact with him, initiate interaction, react to the things that he puts in your path. I think that's a way to describe how love on the one hand and fear on the other hand can go together, reinforce one another, and lead to the realization of both of them simultaneously. And this, I think, is what's the goal in the world to come. Dveikus, connection, and we spoke of connection to a relationship. Ultimately, it's a relationship of love. That's the highest way to describe it. Yeah.
Does all this necessarily, though, put us on a face-to-face basis with Hashem? It's still like the way you're describing it of us being in awe of Him. I mean, would we necessarily have that level of awe for an equal? We would have that level of awe for something above us, and also, can we necessarily disagree with Hashem in our partnership? I mean, we can, but it's not the right move. It still feels like he's sort of like the foreman, and we're in a higher position, but there's levels.
I think that's right. I think there are levels, and I think that. Let me give you another analogy, which you imagine a parent saying to a 12-year-old, here's something I think we should work on together. And we'll discuss it. And we'll only take moves if we both agree on them. And you have the right to have your own opinion. Now, the 12-year-old knows he's not 35, and he knows that his father knows a lot more than he does. But this is the kind of project that the father has initiated for him. So what the father is doing is relating equally to the child on his level. He's not using all of what he is. He's sort of restricting himself to the level the child can interact with. Just like, for example, when you have children, I have a 12-year-old, you'll restrict your vocabulary. I was speaking to some friends of mine, and I used the word calumny. And they rolled their eyes and said, you always talk like that. Why do you do that? Okay, they're adults. They're intelligent, educated adults. I thought they knew the word. I wouldn't do that to a 12-year-old. So I can treat him with respect, and we can do something together, but, of course, I'm only using part of what I am. But the part of what I am is something which it faces him on a level of semi-equality. So, I think that together with the fact that there's more, still, for example, you have a champion tennis player who's playing with his cousin, just because his cousin wants to play and they've decided to play. He's not going to hit aces and make the cousin race around and not return any balls. He'll hit them where the cousin can be able to hit them so that they'll have a nice game together. So he's reducing the use of all of his talents in order to have a comparable relationship.
So in what respect are we comparable to Hashem, right? Is it our importance in the role of creation? Is it our ability in the role of creation?
So I gave you one example of that yesterday. Let's go back over that briefly. In other words, the standard picture is that Kodesh Baruch Hu gave us a Torah. That Torah is his creation, and in it there are rules for our behavior, and we have to follow those rules. So he's laying down the rules, and I'm trying to follow them. That's an absolute asymmetry. There's nothing in common there at all. He makes the rules, and I follow the rules. But then I pointed out that Ramchal, whose ideas we're trying to explain, he himself says that when the rabbis make a law, he goes with the Rishonim who say that that law has divine force. Its authority is God's authority, because God said that you have to do what these people say. And then he asks, well, if the law has divine authority in the end anyway, why didn't God issue the law? And he says because he wanted man to have a hand in making Torah. That's pretty dramatic, right? The Torah is his will. So we're going to make the law, and when we make the law, it becomes his will. That's pretty dramatic, right? Not just following his will, we're doing things that then express his will.
So is it sort of like the relationship between, for example, the United States Constitution and the United States Supreme Court? You have the law written, and then you have a court which sort of interprets cases and applies the law to those cases, something like that?
It's more than that. It's a little bit more like the legislature, which can amend the Constitution. I mean, the legislature or the 3/4 of the states and so forth and so on. There's a procedure for amending the Constitution.
You cannot necessarily amend the Torah, though.
So it's tricky. Okay, let's talk about this just a little bit. First of all, we can make laws that haven't been made before. Now, what about the rabbis making a law which would contradict a Torah law, a law that comes from Kodesh Baruch Hu?
Can't.
So your natural thought is you can't. After all, it's his authority that they're using to make the laws that they make, and he's the one who said you have to keep this other law, so how can they use his authority against him, so to speak? But that's not the right outcome. It's not the right outcome. It's not true. I'll give you an example. What happens when Rosh Hashanah comes out on Shabbos? Rosh Hashanah is supposed to blow the shofar. So the rabbis made a rule that if the Rosh Hashanah comes out on Shabbos, you don't blow the shofar. The rabbis made a rule to not do what HaKadosh Baruch Hu said. And it's binding.
Yeah, but they only made that rule because he also said not to desecrate Shabbat, and since they viewed the blowing of the shofar as a desecration of Shabbat, they're really sort of playing into his rules. You can't say that they're necessarily superseding his authority. It's more like...
Oh, I didn't say it was superseding authority, but I was responding. You didn't say that before either. You were talking about contradicting. Now, your description is not correct. It's not that blowing the shofar is, because then it would apply, I'm sorry, it's not that blowing the shofar. It's that you might carry the shofar in a public domain, which isn't rectified by an Erev, and thereby violate the Shabbos laws of transporting something from one place to another. And you might do that. We're not talking about someone who'll do it on purpose. We're talking about someone who'll do it by mistake. He's so enthused about doing the mitzvah of shofar, he forgets that you can't carry there. Right? Which might not happen. It only might happen, might not happen. On the grounds that it might happen, and if it happens, it's a violation of Shabbos, even though it's the least serious possible violation of Shabbos, the rabbi said, we don't want to take that chance, and therefore we are decreed not to blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah that comes out on Shabbos. They said, don't do it. Now, of course, they're not using human authority to supersede divine authority, but rather look at the authority that the Kodesh Baruch Hu gave them. He gave them the authority, his own divine authority, to contradict one of his own rules. That means by giving them that authority, he puts them on a par with himself. He puts their authority on a par with his authority. There is some limitation on how far they can go, but there's something, it's called Shev Al Taseh. They can tell you to passively give up a mitzvah that he told you to actively do.
So is it like the relationship between Paro and Yosef when he was made the vizier?
Let's think about that. It's true. That was a very common thing in the Middle Ages. If something had to be done which was controversial, and people might be irritated by it, the king got a middleman to represent him. And then when the middleman did it, it worked out well. The king says, "Yeah, well, he's my servant, and that's why it worked out well." Or he's how bad they say, oh, you did a terrible job, throws him away, and saves himself from the hatred of the population. And often Jews were chosen for that because they were expendable. Right? That was it. So it could be that that's what Paro was doing. Every time they come to Paro, he says, go to Joseph and do whatever he says. Because who knows how it's going to come out. Right? But he said, just the throne is above you. So he says to him specifically that his authority is second to the authority of the king. I don't think that Joseph would have had the authority to violate the law of the king. For example, it says he didn't take any grain from the priests because they had an allocation from Paro, and that was therefore off limits for him. So I don't think he had that kind of authority. But here, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives authority to the rabbis, and it's strong enough to be used to contradict other laws that God has made. So it's not just saying yes and fulfilling. There's more to it than that. They have more power than that, more authority than that. Yeah.
Doesn't have to be covered now, but can Rabbi speak about how we expand this individual sense of privilege that's generated by the distance we feel between us and Hashem when He invites us to be a partner? How we expand that to a shared sense of privilege, because often with group identity, a person, the sense of the individual can become insignificant. It's like, well, if 10 people were invited, if a whole yeshiva was invited, if we're all invited, it's like then Hashem doesn't really care about me as much as, it's not as much of a privilege.
That's an interesting thought. Let me come at that thought from a slightly different angle. Here's another analogy that I use for this type of thing. You probably don't remember in 1969 when Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. It was very dramatic because John Kennedy, I think in 1962, said by the end of the decade we'll be on the moon. And that sounded absolutely fantastic, phantasmagoric. And by 1969, he walked on the moon. It's like, talk about the greatness of a country and a group of people and so forth and so on. Now, there were maybe 10,000 people working on the moonshot. The computers and the resources and the fuels and the walls of the rocket, and on the rocket there were 4 different computers, lest one break or 2 break or 3 break, and the computer goes down, the whole thing's and the communications and the astronomy, it's a gigantic amount. Let's imagine a person whose job it is to test the computers. Just go from room to room where there are computers and test them. Run diagnostic tests, and if something's wrong, fix it. That's what he does all day long. Call him Joe. Now, George is also a computer tester, but he works in a different project. He works for a company that makes televisions. Every day, they do exactly the same thing. Turn it on, run the diagnostics, see what's wrong, and fix it. When Neil Armstrong walks on the moon, Joe is going to feel a gigantic thrill. This is what I participated in. I participated in putting a man on the moon. George, if he's sensitive at all, will feel regret for having participated in the destruction of the human mind. It's not the same event, and it's because 10,000 people together put the man on the moon that he feels privileged. Privileged to be part of that group. When the group is doing something the individual can't do, and you play a part in that group's success, being a member of the group enhances you. It doesn't make you feel insignificant. It makes you feel that you were privileged to take part in that gigantic accomplishment. Similarly, I have mentioned the idea of people, which is really true. People during the Second World War, Americans who weren't eligible for the army, went to the army and said, please take me in. I want to fight because destroying the Nazis is the most important thing in the world. And I can't sit on the sidelines when that's going on. So it isn't if he said, a person didn't say, well, there are 2 million soldiers and now there'll be 2 million and one. I'm not going to make any difference. What he said was, I can't sit on the sidelines when you're fighting against the Nazis. So I don't think that every time there's an invitation to a group project, the fact that there are a lot of people make you feel insignificant. Because the project is accomplished by the group is a project that a smaller group of people can't do. It's a gigantic project of gigantic significance. And therefore you feel privileged to be part of it. I think with the Jewish people, what you're raising is a very deep issue. We'll have to devote a few sessions to this separately. But yes, the commitment is to the Jewish people, Each individual Jew has a relationship with the Kodesh Baruch Hu only through the people. There's no such thing as a private relationship. So if he doesn't identify with the people as a whole, he'll be automatically cut off. In fact, the word in Hebrew for being cut off is kores. There are 36, the Mishnah says, 36 crimes which carry the penalty of kores. Every time in the Torah it says kores, but one, it says you'll be cut off from the Jewish people. Every time. Once it says be cut off from Kodesh Baruch Hu, but every other time it says be cut off from the Jewish people. The message is, if you're cut off from the Jewish people, then ipso facto you're cut off from God also. There's no such thing relating to God outside of the Jewish people.
Why
So,
no exception?
It's not an exception. It's not an exception. The one that says you'll be cut off from God is saying what all the others mean, but the others explain to you one way in which it can happen. If you disidentify with the Jewish people, then you're automatically cut off from God. If every one of them said to be cut off from God, you wouldn't know that your relationship to God is metered, is rooted through the Jewish people. You would have no idea that that's so. Not making myself clear?
No, you are.
Okay.
So that's what it's meant to illustrate? Where that one where it says...
No. If you didn't have the one that says you're cut off from God, then without the oral tradition, you wouldn't know that being cut off from the Jewish people means being cut off from God. Maybe it means something else. You can't get the benefits of the charity from the Jewish people, or who knows what. You wouldn't know what the consequences would be. You wouldn't know. So you have to have someplace where it tells you what the actual consequences are, and the other places tell you a way in which this can come to pass. It's not the only way you can be cut off from God, but this definitely cuts you off from God. So it's a double communication there. Okay, so now I think just to put the two pieces back together again, since we started with the idea of God's benevolence, He wants to give something good, and that good should be earned because in that way you're equal to Him and you have the goodness of being like Him. And then there was the idea of connection, and connection is relationship. Having a love relationship with God is the biggest gift you could imagine. Think how important love is. Think how wonderful love is. That in itself is a way to describe the ultimate reward. Enjoying that intense, passionate love. So I think that the two ideas come together. They fit together, and that's what free will makes possible. And without freedom, we wouldn't be qualified for any of that. That's what he says in the second chapter of the Way of God. And as we said yesterday, the embarrassment that you feel is just a symptom of losing out on your purpose, losing out what your real success is, what your real importance is, by not having that, being qualified for that. I want to make one more remark, because I mentioned it yesterday and I didn't elaborate on it. I will stay a little bit later, unless you guys have something right now that you have to run to? No. Okay, because I came late now. I mentioned the idea, people do ask this question, if free will is so important for us, and God doesn't have free will, does that mean He's deficient in some way, that He's somehow lacking in something and really isn't perfect? The first thing I want to share with you is a kind of principle which you could use to gauge these kinds of matters. How important is X? Ask yourself this question. In the world to come, will there be X or not? If there won't be X in the world to come, then X can't have intrinsic value, being intrinsically good. The world to come is only good and is all that's good. Anything that you won't have in the world to come is something which only is a means. It isn't good in and of itself. For those, like the Rambam, who believe that in the world to come there are only souls and no bodies, it means the whole of being embodied is just a means. just a way to get there, that the soul should be able to get there. The body has no intrinsic value. Okay, so if you take that principle in hand, now ask yourself about free will. Is there free will in the world to come? No, there isn't. There's nothing to do. So therefore, free will is only a means. From our point of view, it's not a matter of intrinsic value. Free will is the means by which a human being becomes the kind of creature that can stand in that relationship to a Kadosh Baruch Hu. And we explained how that works. But that's all it's for. And once it serves its purpose, it's outlived its purpose. So that already, I think, reduces the irritation. Well, but God doesn't have free will, so how can he be perfect if he doesn't have free will? Free will is not a symptom of perfection. Free will is the solution to a problem. How can these creatures have my features, says the Creator, which are the features of goodness, if they don't have free will, in which case they can't be independent, they can't have any moral qualities. So free will is the way in which they get those features. It's having the features that's valuable. And the way you get it is just a means. And I think, I also mentioned this yesterday, but I didn't stress it. When you talk about free will, the word free should mean free from external causation. If somebody pushes George down the stairs and he slams into a 5th century Ming vase on the landing and smashes it, George is not responsible for the damage because somebody pushed him. He didn't make any decision. So, free will is the key. I mean, there's a lot to be said here, but free will is the key to being responsible for what you do, because if you are pushed by an external force, then in a really strong sense, it's not you that did it. You're just a tool, and you were used by something else to do it. If God's actions, so to speak, weren't rooted only in himself, if something else could manipulate God, push God, force God, cause God, determine God, then he would be subject to another's will, and that certainly wouldn't be perfection. As we said yesterday, perfection requires absolute independence, self-sufficiency. So when we say that God's will is free, we mean free from external causation. He is free from external causation in spades. He is what he is of necessity. Nothing could be other than it is. So it's absolutely free. And we are limitedly free. We have a certain range of things that we can do and others we can't do. Circumstances change and the options change with the circumstances. We gain abilities, we lose abilities. So that for us also it means freedom from external causation. That he has and we have, and that's crucial. Because without that, it's not you that's acting, and there's no responsibility for what happens, and there's no credit, nor is there discredit, nor is there any critique, if it's not you that's doing it. In that respect, God definitely has free will. Does he have free choice, the ability to do otherwise? That's a different thing. A different thing altogether. That's freedom in the sense of doing it on your own, and that's programmed in us, because otherwise we can't escape from divine causation. The Creator doesn't have to escape from divine causation. It's just him. Divine causation is a threat to us because it's other than us. And since it's other than us, it means that it's not me doing it. I'm being manipulated by something outside. Divine causation is him. That's the inside, the outside, the whole thing. So it's not a threat to his autonomy and self-directedness. I think that's the way to understand what it means to say that God has free will. In that respect, he definitely has free will. It's absolutely necessary. And it's not related to our ability to do other than we did. Because that means that when you say that God has free will, it doesn't mean that he could do evil. That doesn't follow. It's just free from external causation. Internally, he has a certain character, and that character determines what his will does. Okay, this is like an introduction to the Ideas of free will. Where? Today's Wednesday. Okay, so we have tomorrow.
Part one.
Hmm?
It's part one.
Yeah, part one, right. Questions on what we said today?
Maybe just explain again what he meant that we could ask if God has free choice, but we can say in respect he does have free will.
I didn't say we. I don't know, the words "we could ask" don't ring with me. It has been asked. People have said, "Does he have free choice?" Meaning, could he do otherwise than what he did? And if he could, does that mean he could do evil? It just happens to do good. And if so, does that mean that he's really good if he could do evil? And that's a road that you don't want to go down. So we're going to say about God that he could not do other than what he did. What he does is always the best that could be done because he is perfection. Then people say, well, then he's not really free. Well, he's not really free to choose other than what he did, but that's not the kind of freedom that's necessary. The freedom that's necessary is being free from external causation. That's a different idea, and that is true. Yeah.
So, I've always been more comfortable just kind of saying, following like the other road, saying God can do whatever, and whatever God does, even if we view it as evil, it's not actually evil, because by definition it can't be evil because God is perfect.
Well, let's see whether your words are consistent. At the end, the last thing you said, God can't do evil because he's perfect. Right?
Evil in our sense.
Well, pick any sense you like. You're saying the words. You have a right to choose whatever sense you like.
Evil in the sense of true evil. God can't do evil.
Oh, stop there for a
Yeah.
second. Okay. Whatever true evil is, right? God can't do that because he's perfection. He's good, right?
Yeah.
You see now that you're now contradicting what you started with. You started by saying that God can do whatever. But you end up by saying, but not really whatever, because whatever is really evil, maybe we don't have a good idea of evil, but there is such a thing as evil. Whatever is really evil, he can't do because he's perfect and all good. I think the last sentence is correct. And the idea that he could do whatever has to be qualified. Well, not really whatever, because whatever is really evil, he can't do.
But if he did that thing that is pure evil, it wouldn't be evil, is what I'm saying.
But you can't say that because you're saying it's evil and then you say it wouldn't be evil. Right? If you yourself are saying the words, he can't do X, you use those words. There's something he can't do. You give it a name and then you qualify the name and so forth and so on. Right? But there is something which he can't do because it's evil. Now, not only is this a philosophical idea, but think of Abraham speaking to God and pleading on behalf of Sodom and Gomorrah. He says to God, if you kill the righteous in the city, then you're doing wrong. Shall the judge of the earth not do justice? You can't do that. That's what Abraham says. It's not an empty statement. And God doesn't say to him, dope, go back to philosophy 1. Whatever I do is okay because I did it. God, of course, credits that.
No, but Abraham knew that no matter what he said or argued, it was all up to God.
Understand? God, so to speak, is asking him, what do you think of my project of destroying Sodom? He actually asked him that. Now, Abraham's telling you, here's the way it seems to me. It seems to me that you cannot destroy the righteous, because if you destroyed the righteous, then the judge of the earth would not be doing justice. So you can't do that. So there's something that he can't do. Destroying the righteous, he cannot do.
Because God created the world with chesed.
Well, good, fine, there are all sorts of reasons. But the bottom line is, there's something which you're going to rule out of God's purview, out of his environment, because of what he is. That can't happen.
Can you repeat the last line?
Yeah. There are certain things that you're going to take out of God's repertoire, the things that are available to him, on the grounds that, given what he is, these aren't part of his repertoire. They aren't part of what's available to him. After all, if good doesn't mean that you won't do certain things, it doesn't mean anything at all. The Torah tells us that God is good. Tamu kitov Hashem. So, if you say, yeah, he's good, but anything could happen, you're just contradicting yourself. From the good, not anything could happen. Some things could happen, and other things can't happen. We have a problem, a standard problem in all of the Jewish literature, the suffering of the righteous. Right? There are lots of answers to that question. None of them is, so what? Why is it a problem? Suffering is caused by God. When God causes it, it's good, so everything's fine. Don't even ask the question. Nobody says that. What they say is, you don't know all the circumstances. Maybe it's contributing to a good in his future. Maybe he did something in the past that has to be rectified that you don't know about. Transmigration of souls, reincarnation. Those are all sorts of answers. But nobody says, don't even raise the question because it's foolish. Whatever God does is perfect and therefore there are no questions. No. The whole book of Job is about that. Moses talked about it. Oral tradition says that Moses asked God about it, got part of an answer and not the rest of the answer, and so on and so on. No one dismisses the question as a mistake. Okay, let's leave it here for today, and we'll pick it up tomorrow in session.